She's terrible, but she's getting a free ride. I saw a picture of her on Time Magazine today. She looks like the most beautiful actress ever to live. It was a drawing, and actually, she looked very much like our great First Lady, Melania. She didn't look like Camilla. That's right. But of course, she's a beautiful woman, so we'll leave it at that.
We will leave it at that. Part of Donald Trump's conversation last night with Elon Musk on the X social media platform. The event delayed by significant technical issues. Does that sound familiar? Which Musk claimed was a hack. No evidence that that is the case. Much more on that conversation in just a moment. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Tuesday, August 13th. With a
fiscal record of any president in the history of the country. And you can go back and look at documents from Donald Trump's Treasury Department. They lay it out very clearly. Even before COVID, he was exploding the deficit. I tweeted something this morning as I was getting ready for the show after I read this, and it shows a line of the deficit going down like this under Barack Obama, going down from the 2008 collapse and then shooting back up the second Donald Trump becomes president of the United States. So again, I am all for fiscal responsibility. In fact, that's sort of, again, that's what got me into this business in the first place. But to suggest that Donald Trump should lecture anybody on the deficit instead of writing an editorial talking about he was the most fiscally reckless president in U.S. history. He accumulated and amassed more debt in 4 years than America did. The Republic did its first 225 years of existence. You know, that's the editorial to write and ask whether he's going to be any different if he gets elected over the next 4 years.
Yeah, and of course it wouldn't be any different. Donald Trump has never cared about the deficit at all. And as you say, he was the biggest spender, certainly one of the biggest spenders in American history. However you look at it in absolute terms, per capita, whatever, he was a huge spender. He slashed revenue for the government with his big tax cuts. He didn't offset it with any actual budget cuts. In fact, he doesn't like budget cuts. He wants to spend more. So he is absolutely the last person in the world you would ask to come in and fix a deficit. And that actually is true. You look at the cycle over the last 20, 30, 50 years, if you want to cut the deficit, elect Democrats. They're supposed to be the big spenders, but the deficits go down. And if you want bigger deficits and more debt, elect the Republicans. They just like to spend that money. And Donald Trump is certainly of that ilk.
The only time Republicans hear about deficits is when Democrats are in the White House. And then when they're in the White House again, you saw it under George W. Bush. You saw it under Donald Trump. Deficits explode at record rates. Willie, Willie, if you could, love for you to read this David French piece. I do want to circle back to David really quickly, though. And David, before we read your new piece for the New York Times, I just want to say, this is what's so maddening to me. The very things that made you and me conservatives, the very things that moved us to the Republican Party, the very things that made us believe that we were fighting for right, whether it was I'm more boring, but balanced budgets, fiscal responsibility, taking care of taxpayers' dollars, giving them the best bang for their buck, making government as efficient as possible, having the local government do what the local government can do and what they can't let the state governments do and what they can't let the federal governments do. And in all of that, you're worried about individual freedoms, individual liberty, individual rights to go out, work hard, make a living, make a life where your kids have it better than you do and they have a better opportunity than you even had, right? That's gone, man. That is gone. And when I hear people talking about, oh, you're not a conservative anymore, it's laughable. Because what we're seeing now, we're seeing idol worship for I would say a guy. It's a party now. It's a party. They're not conservative. They're not fiscally conservative. They're not conservative on foreign policy. They've got two candidates that want to turn Ukraine over to the Russians, the antithesis of everything that Ronald Reagan fought for, that Republicans have always fought for. There is nothing conservative about this Republican Party. And David, I just have to ask, if they lose again this year, is there, okay, here we go. If the question I was going to ask is, if they lose this year, is there a chance that they are going to go back to more tried and true Burkean, Reagan-esque conservative principles? By the way, what you're looking at now, direct from Joe's Twitter account, a little chart I made this morning after reading the op-ed. In blue, that is left-wing, socialist, communist, whatever you want to call him, Bill Ayers-loving, Reverend Wright-loving, left-wing, like Marxist Barack Obama's deficit record. By the way, it goes down. It goes straight down. So all those things Republicans said about him, obviously not true. Now, if you look right after Barack Obama left office, by the way, 4 years pre-COVID, look at deficits under Donald Trump. David, they go straight up. That's not conservative.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that's happening is you have MAGA has seized control of the Republican Party, intentionally transforming it radically, not just, of course, on a policy basis, but on a character basis, calling the old Republican Party the dead consensus. And if you object to it, they say, well, what happened to you? In other words, they're pulling the party away and accusing anyone who objects to it of being a traitor. And this has been the dynamic for 9 years now. And here's what's stunning, though, Joe. And, you know, I think some of your viewers just would be amazed by this. There are still many, many, many Republicans who don't realize how different MAGA is from traditional Republicanism. There's still many Republicans who believe they're voting for at least strong elements of the older party. And Trump benefits immensely from this, even as MAGA just keeps changing it.
So, David.
Yeah, Willie, look at that.
Yeah, there it is. It's pretty clear, stark in that graphic there. You've got a new piece out for the New York Times, David, titled "To Save Conservatism from Itself, I Am Voting for Harris." In it, David writes this: while there are voters who are experiencing a degree of Trump nostalgia, remembering American life pre-COVID as a time of full employment and low inflation, there is a different and darker story to tell about Trump's first term. Our social fabric frayed. It's not just that abortions increased, the murder rates skyrocketed, drug overdose deaths hit new highs, marriage rates fell, and birth rates continued their long decline. Americans ended his term more divided than when it began. I'm often asked by Trump voters, David writes, if I'm still conservative, and I respond that I can't vote for Trump precisely because I am conservative. The only real hope for restoring a conservatism that values integrity, demonstrates real compassion, and defends our foundational constitutional principles isn't to try to make the best of Trump, a man who values only himself. If he wins again, it will validate his cruelty and his ideological transformation of the Republican Party. If Harris wins, the West will still stand against Vladimir Putin, and conservative Americans will have a chance to build something decent from the ruins of a party that was once a force for genuine good in American life. David, let you expand a little bit on that. This is something Joe talks about all the time. I'm still conservative. You guys were just talking about this standing right here. It's the party, the Trumpists, that have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just that the party's changed, but things have changed. So in 2016 and 2020, I voted third party. I wrote in. I could not vote for the Democrat. I definitely was not going to vote for Donald Trump. But there are some things that have changed since 2020. One of them was January 6th, which illustrated the links that Donald Trump would go, the destructive links to our own constitutional order that Donald Trump would go. And then the next year, when Russia invades Ukraine, you see the incredible stakes for the international order, for American national security. And on both of those just paramount issues, Trump is not just on the wrong side in many ways, especially here domestically, he's the instigator of the crisis itself. And so if you're dealing with changed events, I feel like it's incumbent on me to be open to changing my mind on at least one element of my stand. And that is, in this case, to vote for the party that at the very least is going to stand against Russian aggression. And Joe, saying that out loud, that I'm voting against a Republican to make sure that the United States resists Russian aggression is, again, one of those moments where you can't believe how much things have changed.
No, it's a surreal moment. And, I have explained to people before, I explained, Caddy, when Donald Trump was president, that I've always had great faith in America. And many people say, and they do, many people say that I'm too optimistic. It's too glass half full. But my feeling has always been that Madisonian democracy rounds off the sharp edges. That's why I said when Donald Trump was president, and people come up to me and go, oh, this is all about, ideology. I said, no, you don't understand. I said, it's about respecting constitutional boundaries. I'm fairly confident that everybody from Mike Pence to Bernie Sanders would respect constitutional boundaries. And if Mike Pence were president or Bernie Sanders were president, I'd worry much less than if Donald Trump were president, because, again, Madisonian democracy, checks and balances, a separation of powers, that rounds off the sharp edges. We could survive 4 years of somebody who's very conservative or very liberal. Our problem here is someone who just doesn't respect constitutional boundaries and brags about being authoritarian to his supporters. And the truth is, I agree with David. There are a lot of people who think that this is like Clinton versus Dole in 1996, but there are quite a few Republicans I've talked to that like the authoritarian streak in Donald Trump. They like the strongman approach.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Pence put his own life in danger. He put his family's life in danger in order to protect and defend the bounds of constitutional democracy. It's night and day from the former president, who is now running again, telling Christian conservatives, don't worry, you won't have to vote again in 4 years' time because I'll have it all fixed. And who knows, Donald Trump says stuff that is random and makes no sense, and maybe it was just another thing he says that's random and makes no sense. But it's pretty striking when you have a candidate running for president of the United States who is telling his supporters, who is telling American voters, you will not have to vote again in 4 years' time. The implication being that there will not be an election in 4 years' time. Now, I'm one of those people who thinks that the American guardrails hold and that the courts are strong and the press is strong and that there will be an election in 2028. And there are an awful lot of Democrats who believe that there will be an election in 2028 because they want to run in 2028. But it is very different, and it's really all about Donald Trump. David, when you look at Kamala Harris's record as a conservative, and I know you've got probably fellow conservatives who are voting for her, and I know people in the conservative wing of the Republican Party who have endorsed her, and you look at her record on things like immigration or as a prosecutor in San Francisco, or what she has said about a single-payer health system, or what she has said about ending fracking in Pennsylvania, and I know she's reversed some of that, but they seem to be reflections of her liberalism. Is it hard for you to say that you're going to vote for her?
Yeah, it is, actually. I'm a little bit encouraged that in many ways she's moving closer to me, disclaiming the defund the police stuff and the fracking bans, endorsing the border bill, for example. So in some concrete ways, she is moving more to the middle, and that is somewhat reassuring. But yeah, at the end of the day, if she wins the presidency, there are a lot of policy issues that we would disagree on, a lot of policy issues. There are some we'd agree on, such as support for Ukraine. But we can have, as Joe was just saying, we can have that conversation, and there are other elections I can vote in, like for Senate or for House, that can blunt the effect of her more left-wing policies. But we're doing it within the norms of American democracy, within the rules of American democracy. And then in the next election, if she's gone too far, I'll vote a different direction. But we can't treat this. This is a core element of my piece. We cannot treat this like a regular election where some of the regular policy issues dictate our vote. There are other frontline, top-tier issues like respect for American democracy, defending and maintaining American allies that are just at this very high level, and we can't pretend they're not there.
As David lays out in the piece, the Republican Party now unrecognizable from what it was just a few decades ago in terms of both foreign policy and some matters here at home. But really, the great question, the unanswerable question is, what happens next? Even if Donald Trump were to be defeated this fall, does that mean Trumpism? Does that mean the MAGA movement goes away? There are certainly some in the Republican Party who say, yes, we'll be finally rid of him. Let's move on. We'll rebirth this party into something new for 2028. I don't know there's a guarantee of that. He is still going to be the loudest voice in the party, most likely. Certainly his running mate is set up to be a loud voice in his party going forward. The MAGA movement has captured so many state, local officials, state houses, Congress, the House of Republicans, House of Representatives in particular. I don't know that even if Trump were to be defeated in November, that this would be something the party would be able to rid itself of this movement. This is the party right now, the MAGA movement. And it might look a little different. It might have a different name atop of it in 2028. But I don't know that we could just take as faith that it'll go back to what it was.
Yeah, with tens of millions of regular supporters as well on board. As long as we're inside the editorial pages, the Wall Street Journal, Jerry Baker writing this morning, Trump is looking like a loser again, talking about the press conference last week that he calls false, obtuse, and lunatic. We're going to get into more of that from the Wall Street Journal in just a moment. Still ahead, we'll hear more from Donald Trump's 2-hour glitch-filled interview with billionaire Elon Musk, including what the former president had to say about a conversation with Russian President Vladimir Musk, engaged in a conversation last night on the platform with 1.3 million people listening on X Spaces at its peak. The event delayed for about 40 minutes by technical problems. Musk blamed a cyber attack, a claim that could not be verified, called into doubt by a number of experts. Once things finally did get underway, the pair spoke for more than 2 hours, with Trump doing most of the talking. Here's a little of what he had to say.
I hate to say this. The reason the numbers are much bigger than you would think is they're also taking their non-productive people. Now, these aren't people that will kill you. We have enough of them. But these are people that are non-productive. They are just non-productive. I mean, for whatever reason. They're not workers, or they don't want to work, or whatever. And these countries are getting rid of non-productive people in the caravans in many cases. And they're also getting rid of their murderers and their drug dealers and the people that are really brutal people. And they're coming into our country at levels that have never been seen before. I know Putin very well. I got along with him very well. He respected me, and it's just one of those things. And we would talk a lot about Ukraine. It was the apple of his eye. But I said, don't ever do it. Don't ever do it. You can't do it, Vladimir. You do it, it's going to be a bad day. You cannot do it. And I told him things that what I do, and he said, no way. And I said, way.